The peaceful human colony on Arden 7 had flourished for years. Located on a distant planet, it was a quiet haven for those seeking a new life far from the conflicts of the galaxy. The settlers had built their homes in harmony with the land, growing crops, building strong communities, and living in peace. No one could have predicted the sudden arrival of the Zoreth Empire, led by their fearsome warlord, Gorath. Gorath's fleet entered the planet's atmosphere with terrifying speed. His ships, massive and advanced, covered the sky like dark clouds. The peaceful humans had no way of fighting back. It wasn't just the size of Gorath's forces that struck fear into their hearts, but the ruthless reputation he carried with him. Gorath had conquered countless worlds, leaving nothing but ashes in his wake. He believed in the strength of power and dominance, and he ruled over his empire with an iron fist. To him, the weak were nothing. The humans of Arden 7 had little defense. They weren't warriors, only settlers who had come to find peace, but the news of Gorath's invasion spread like wildfire. Commander Ilara Vance, a skilled fighter and a natural leader, knew that their only chance was to stand together. She had once led military operations on Earth, and though she had left the battlefield years ago, her skills hadn't dulled. She gathered the colony's forces and prepared them to defend their home. "We won't back down," Ilara told her soldiers as they gathered in the command center. "No matter how strong they are, we fight for our home. For our future, we're not giving up without a fight." The battle began quickly. Gorath's ships fired upon the human defenses, their energy beams tearing through the air and striking the surface of Arden 7. Humans scrambled to defend their homes, but they were outmatched. Gorath's forces were heavily armed, and they came in waves. His army consisted of highly trained soldiers, armed with technology far beyond anything the humans had. Ilara fought with all her might, leading her troops into battle. She was quick, smart, and tactical. Even though the enemy outnumbered them, she had always believed that determination could make a difference. Her soldiers followed her, inspired by her courage. But as the hours passed, it became clear that they could not hold off the invaders for long. Amid the chaos, Ilara received urgent news. The enemy had reached the outer perimeter, and her forces were being pushed back. It wasn't just the soldiers they were after. It was something more. Gorath, who had studied Ilara's reputation, saw her as the ultimate prize, someone who would be a worthy addition to his collection of conquered worlds. As Ilara led a group of her best soldiers in a last-ditch attempt to secure the perimeter, she came face to face with Gorath himself. His presence was imposing. He was a towering figure, covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes, glowing with an eerie blue fire, locked onto hers. He was impressed. "You are the leader," Gorath said, his voice deep and commanding. "The one who stands against me. I admire your strength." Ilara stood tall, refusing to show fear. "I fight for my people," she said firmly. "I won't let you destroy them." Gorath's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You misunderstand," he said. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to claim you." Ilara's eyes widened, but she quickly regained her composure. "Claim me. You can't take what isn't yours." Gorath laughed, a cold, menacing sound. "I am the ruler of the Zoreth Empire. What I take, I claim. And you, Commander, will be mine." Before Ilara could respond, Gorath's soldiers closed in on her. She fought valiantly, but the sheer number of soldiers proved too much. She was overwhelmed, and in the end, she was captured. As she was dragged toward the alien warlord, Ilara's mind raced. She had always fought for freedom, for her people's right to live peacefully. But now, as she was brought aboard Gorath's massive warship, she faced a new enemy, one that wasn't going to stop until he had what he wanted. The warlord, however, had more than just military plans for Ilara. To Gorath, this was not just about defeating an enemy. It was about claiming a worthy mate, a challenge to his power. He believed that if he could conquer Ilara, the strongest human leader, it would solidify his dominance over the entire galaxy. But Ilara wasn't someone who would bend to his will easily. She had fought for years to protect the people of Arden 7, and she wasn't about to let a ruthless warlord decide her fate. She would find a way to escape, no matter what it took. As the warship's engines hummed, propelling them farther from her home, Ilara's mind was already working. She knew that the real battle was only beginning. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about fighting for the future of her people and showing Goreth that he had underestimated her. The invasion had begun, but this was far from over. And Ilara would never give up, no matter what. The massive warship carrying Ilara Vance soared through the stars. The cold, metallic walls of the ship felt like a prison to her. She was surrounded by alien technology that she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. She was no longer in control. She had been captured by the enemy. And the once proud leader of Arden 7 was now a prisoner aboard the ship of Goreth, the terrifying warlord of the Zoreth Empire. Ilara's mind raced with thoughts of escape, but the reality of her situation was undeniable. She had been disarmed, and her movements were restricted. The alien soldiers who guarded her cell were fierce and intimidating, their eyes always watching. Despite this, Ilara never lost her resolve. She had faced impossible odds before, and she wasn't about to give up now. As she sat on the cold floor of the cell, Ilara's thoughts turned to her people. Arden 7 was now in the hands of Goreth's forces, and though she had led her soldiers bravely, she couldn't shake the guilt. She had failed them, and now they were at the mercy of an alien warlord. But she wouldn't give up hope. She couldn't. There had to be a way out of this. Her heart pounded when the door to the cell slid open, and Goreth himself stepped inside. His towering figure filled the doorway. He was dressed in dark armor that gleamed in the dim light, his eyes burning with a blue glow that seemed to pierce through her. The warlord moved with purpose, his steps echoing through the small room as he approached Ilara. She stood up quickly, her posture proud, defiant. "You've been a thorn in my side, Commander." Goreth's voice rumbled, deep and full of authority. "But I've come to offer you a choice." Ilara raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "A choice? What could a monster like you possibly offer me?" Goreth's smile was cold and calculating. "You'll come to understand soon enough. You see, I don't just conquer worlds, Commander. I take the strongest, the fiercest, and the most intelligent. And you, Ilara, are the perfect candidate. You will be my mate." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The word mate hung in the air like a curse. Goreth's intentions were clear. To him, she was no more than a prize to be claimed, a trophy of his victory. "You think you can just take me?" Ilara's voice was steady, despite the anger bubbling inside her. "You can't control me. I won't be anyone's prize." Goreth chuckled darkly. "You misunderstand. It is not about control. It is about strength. I admire yours. That is why I want you by my side, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. You will be part of my empire, and together we will rule the galaxy." Ilara's eyes flashed with disbelief. She couldn't understand why Goreth thought she would ever agree to such an arrangement. She was no one's partner, certainly not his. Her people had fought for freedom, not to be ruled by an alien warlord. "Your empire," Ilara said with a mocking smile. "You think I would help you build an empire of fear and destruction? You're wrong." Goreth didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her with a calculating look. He seemed unfazed by her defiance, almost as if he expected it. In a way, he respected it. To him, strength was the greatest trait a leader could possess, and Ilara had it in abundance. "You will come to see things my way, Commander," Goreth said quietly. "Eventually. All I ask is that you give me a chance. You are the one thing I respect in this galaxy. Your will, your power, and in time, that respect will grow into something more." Ilara narrowed her eyes. There was something about the way he spoke that was different. It wasn't the same cold, commanding tone she had expected from a conqueror. There was a hint of sincerity, though twisted, behind his words. But Ilara wasn't fooled. She wasn't going to fall for his mind games. "I will never be yours," she said firmly, her voice full of conviction. "Not now, not ever." Gorath sighed, clearly frustrated, but he didn't show it outwardly. "We will see. You are strong, and I respect that. But don't mistake respect for weakness. I will have you, Ilara, one way or another." He turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at her. "When you are ready to see reason, I will be waiting. You are not my prisoner. You are my future." With that, the door slid shut behind him. Ilara stood there in the silence, her fists clenched. The warlord's words echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them affect her. She would find a way out of this. She would fight back. She had to. For herself, for her people, and for the future of Arden 7. As the days passed, Ilara learned more about her captor. Gorath wasn't just a mindless conqueror. He was intelligent, calculating, and his power was immense. But there was something more beneath the surface. He valued strength, not just in battle but in character. And somehow he seemed to see that in her. But Ilara knew one thing for certain. She would never be part of his empire. She would find a way to break free, to return to her people, and to protect the home she had fought so hard for. The battle had only just begun. Days passed aboard the warship, and Ilara's situation only grew more difficult. The walls of her cell felt smaller with each passing moment, and she found herself growing increasingly frustrated. She was no longer in control of her destiny. Her freedom had been taken from her, and her people were still under the rule of Gorath's empire. But deep down, Ilara knew one thing. She would not remain a prisoner forever. She could never accept the idea of living under the tyrannical rule of Gorath, no matter how powerful he was. Her first few days on the ship had been filled with attempts to break free, but every plan she made was thwarted by Gorath's soldiers. They were always watching her, making sure she stayed in line. But Ilara was not a woman to be easily defeated. She was a fighter, both physically and mentally, and she would find a way to escape. The key, she realized, wasn't in brute force. It was in finding the right moment, the right ally. The ship was vast, filled with corridors, hallways, and strange alien technology. The Zorath Empire was known for its advanced machinery, and Ilara spent much of her time observing the ship's systems, learning about the inner workings of the Warlord's vessel. She had a sharp mind, and she used it to her advantage. Every day, she watched the routines of the guards, the patterns of the alien crew, and the ways in which the ship operated. She knew it would take time, but Ilara was patient. Her opportunity came one evening when the guards were distracted. Ilara had learned through her quiet observations that there was a moment during the ship's operations when the guards would leave their posts to rest. She had spent days mapping out the ship's layout, noting areas where security was weaker and where she might find an escape route. It wasn't much, but it was a start. With a surge of adrenaline, she moved swiftly through the shadows, avoiding detection. Her heart raced as she slipped through the hallways, careful to stay out of sight. She knew that if she was caught, there would be no second chances. But as she rounded a corner, she was surprised to see a figure standing in her path. It was Kalon, one of Gorath's soldiers. He was tall, with dark skin and a look of quiet intensity in his eyes. Ilara froze for a moment, but then she remembered the plan. Kalon was one of the few soldiers who had shown signs of hesitation in his loyalty to Gorath. He had never been openly hostile to her. And in fact, there were times when she had seen him look at her with what seemed like respect. "You're not where you're supposed to be," Kalon said, his voice low but not threatening. Ilara took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not where I'm supposed to be because I don't belong here. I never did." Kalon studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And you think escaping will change that? Gorath is not a man who lets his enemies slip away easily." "I'm not his enemy," Ilara replied. "I'm just a leader who refuses to kneel to someone like him. You should understand that. You're not like the others." For a moment, Kalon said nothing. Then, to Ilara's surprise, he nodded. I was a soldier once, but I've seen enough of Gorath's empire to know that his ways are not the only path. I've heard stories of his cruelty, his desire to control everything. He took a step closer. Maybe you're right. Maybe there's more to this fight than what we've been told. Ilara's heart quickened. She had always believed there were cracks in Gorath's empire, and now it seemed she had found one. She couldn't waste this chance. You have to help me, she said urgently. I know a way to escape this ship. I know how we can fight back. Together, we can take down Gorath and end his reign of terror. Kalon hesitated for a moment, then glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one else was around. I don't know if I can trust you fully, he said quietly, but I can't just stand by while he destroys everything. I'll help you. For now. With Kalon's help, Ilara was able to gather more information about the ship. The soldier knew the layout better than she did, and he shared everything he knew about the ship's weak points and security measures. Ilara had always been a quick learner, and it didn't take long for her to understand the ship's vulnerabilities. But even with Kalon's assistance, Ilara knew it wouldn't be easy. Gorath had eyes everywhere, and the Warlord's power seemed to grow with each passing day. Ilara would need to be careful, patient, and above all, strategic. She could not afford to make any mistakes. The more Ilara spent time with Kalon, the more she realized that his loyalty to Gorath was not as strong as she had first believed. Kalon had seen too much suffering under Gorath's rule, and he was beginning to question his place in the empire. Ilara's presence on the ship was a spark that had ignited something deep within him, a desire for change, a desire for freedom. But the truth was, Kalon was not the only one who had started to question Gorath's reign. As the days passed, Ilara began to see signs of dissent among other members of the crew. There were whispers in the hallways, subtle glances exchanged when Gorath wasn't watching. Ilara wasn't the only one who felt trapped. The ship was filled with beings who longed for something different, something better. And that, Ilara realized, was her real weapon. She wasn't alone. The people aboard this ship were beginning to see that they didn't have to serve Gorath. They could fight back. Together, they could form an alliance strong enough to challenge the Warlord's empire. Ilara's resistance was growing, and with Kalon by her side, the fight for freedom had only just begun. Ilara's days aboard the Zorath warship had become a series of quiet, tense moments. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a leader in the making, rallying those who would listen and forming secret alliances. It was slow work, and she had to be careful. She couldn't afford to alert Gorath to her plans too soon. Every move, every word, had to be calculated. With Kalon as her ally, Ilara began to feel like there was a chance, however small, that they could bring down the tyrant. Kalon was a valuable asset. He knew the inner workings of the ship, the security systems, and the routines of Gorath's soldiers. Slowly, he revealed more and more information, leading Ilara to new areas of the ship she had never seen before. Despite his training as a soldier, Kalon had never been entirely comfortable with the cruelty of the Zorath Empire. He had seen firsthand how Gorath ruled through fear and force, and his conscience had begun to weigh heavily on him. He had been a soldier, following orders without question, but now, under Ilara's influence, he began to see the Empire's true nature. Ilara, Kalon said one day, his voice low as they met in secret. I found something. Ilara's eyes narrowed. What is it? Kalon looked around, making sure no one was listening. A weapons cache, hidden deep within the ship. It's not the usual arms. These weapons are more advanced, enough to damage Gorath's ships and cripple his forces. I don't know why they're being kept in secret, but I think it's our chance. Ilara's heart raced. This could be the break they needed. But she knew they couldn't act recklessly. The last thing she wanted was to alert Gorath before they were ready. We need to move carefully, Ilara said, her voice steady but firm. We'll need to gather a team. We can't take that cache alone. Kalon nodded. I agree, but we must act quickly. The longer we wait, the more time Gorath has to solidify his control. As the days passed, Ilara began quietly recruiting others. There were more allies among the crew than she had initially realized. Some were soldiers like Kalon, disillusioned with their roles in the Empire. Others were engineers, pilots, and even medical staff who had seen enough of Gorath's cruelty and were ready for change. It was a slow process, building trust in the shadows, but Ilara's leadership and determination inspired them. The plan was set. Ilara, Kalon, and a small group of trusted allies would infiltrate the weapons cache, secure the weapons, and then strike at the heart of Gorath's power. It was a dangerous mission, and Ilara knew there was no turning back. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. The fate of her people, of Arden 7, depended on what happened next. On the day of the mission, Ilara and her team moved quietly through the ship. They wore disguises and kept to the shadows, avoiding the main corridors and sticking to areas with fewer guards. Kalon led the way, his knowledge of the ship's layout proving invaluable. Ilara's heart pounded as they navigated the twisting halls, but she remained focused. She had a job to do, and she would not fail. When they finally reached the weapons cache, Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It was hidden behind a series of locked doors, guarded by advanced security systems. But with Kalon's help, they managed to disable the security and gain access. Inside, the weapons were unlike anything Ilara had ever seen. Sleek, futuristic rifles, energy blades that glowed with a faint blue light, and explosives that could level entire cities. These were not just weapons of war, they were tools of destruction, weapons capable of ending entire worlds. "This is it," Ilara whispered, her voice filled with awe. "With these, we can fight back." Kalon stood beside her, his eyes scanning the cache. "We need to make sure we're not caught. We can't take everything, but if we take enough, it will give us a fighting chance." Ilara nodded. She didn't want to risk getting too greedy. They had to be smart. They filled their bags with the most powerful weapons, careful not to take more than they could carry. As they prepared to leave, Ilara felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They had what they needed to challenge Gorath, but they still had one big obstacle to overcome: getting out of the weapons cache and back to their safe haven without being detected. Just as they were about to leave the room, a loud alarm blared through the ship. Red lights flashed, and Ilara's heart sank. The security system had been triggered. "They've found us," one of Ilara's allies shouted, panic in his voice. Kalon quickly grabbed Ilara's arm. "We need to move. Now." The group raced through the ship's corridors, moving as fast as they could. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. Gorath's soldiers were closing in. Ilara's mind raced. They couldn't be caught now. Not after everything they had risked. They reached a maintenance shaft, and Ilara climbed inside, her team following her. It was cramped, but it would give them a chance to escape. Kalon, the last to enter, pulled the hatch shut just as a group of soldiers rounded the corner. Breathing heavily, Ilara led the way through the narrow, dark tunnels. The ship's maintenance shafts were rarely used, but they would lead them to a hidden exit. It wasn't the safest route, but it was their only option. The soldiers were still searching for them, but for now, they had bought themselves some time. As Ilara emerged from the maintenance tunnel and stepped into the dimly lit corridors outside, she looked around. They were almost there, but as she turned back to look at the ship, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Gorath would stop at nothing to regain control, but Ilara had the weapons, the allies, and the will to fight back. The war was far from over. The escape from the weapons cache had been a close call, but Ilara and her team managed to avoid detection. Their hearts were still racing, but they had the weapons they needed to strike at the heart of Gorath's empire. As they returned to their hidden base within the ship, a sense of determination filled the air. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting back. Ilara stood in front of her small group of allies, each one of them breathing heavily after the narrow escape. Kaelan, his face set in a grim expression, spoke first. "We did it, but it's not over. Gorath will be after us now. He knows we've taken the weapons, and he'll stop at nothing to hunt us down." Ilara nodded, her gaze steely. "We knew the risks, but this is our chance. We have to use these weapons wisely, strike when he least expects it." The team members looked at each other, some filled with fear, others with a quiet sense of hope. For the first time since her capture, Ilara felt that she was not alone. There were others who believed in her cause, and together, they had a chance to make a difference. But she knew the war wouldn't be easy. Gorath was ruthless, and his forces were vast. They would need more than just weapons. They needed strategy. "We need to create chaos," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with purpose. "We need to disrupt Gorath's control over the ship and make him question everything he's built." Kaelan stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "We could sabotage the ship's power systems, cause confusion, and weaken his forces. It will take time, but if we do it right, it will give us the opening we need to strike." Ilara considered his words carefully. A well-timed strike could cripple Gorath's command, but they had to act quickly before the Warlord could recover. "Let's do it," she said, determination in her voice. "We'll split into 2 teams. One will focus on the power systems, the other will gather more allies. We need to weaken Gorath's grip on the ship before we make our move." The plan was set. Ilara and Kaelan would lead the teams, and they would work in silence, moving through the ship's maze-like halls, careful not to alert the enemy. Every step was a calculated risk, but the potential payoff was worth it. The first few hours of the mission went smoothly. Ilara's team had already sabotaged key power systems, causing minor blackouts throughout the ship. The crew's confusion was a welcome sign that their plan was working. But as they moved deeper into the heart of the ship, Ilara felt the weight of the mission press down on her. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. "We're almost there," Kaelan said, his voice low as he looked over a map of the ship's control room. Ilara nodded, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The tension was building, and every footstep echoed in the quiet halls. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the corridor. Ilara froze, her heart skipping a beat. They had been discovered. "Move," Ilara ordered, signaling for the group to head toward the escape route. They sprinted down the narrow hallway, their footsteps quick and frantic. Behind them, the sound of approaching soldiers grew louder. They were being pursued, and Ilara knew there was no time to waste. "Split up," she shouted. "We'll meet at the rendezvous point." The team scattered, each member heading in a different direction to throw off the pursuing guards. Ilara's heart raced as she ran, her breath coming in short gasps. She had led them into this, and now it was up to her to lead them out. Her mind was focused, her body moving on instinct as she darted through the ship's corridors. The ship, once a place of control and order, now felt like a labyrinth of danger and uncertainty. But Ilara had one advantage. She knew how to survive. She had faced worse before, and she wasn't about to back down now. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Kaelan, who had also managed to escape the soldiers. The two of them exchanged a brief, relieved look before continuing their sprint toward the rendezvous point. The sounds of pursuit were growing closer, and Ilara's pulse quickened. They couldn't stop now. At the rendezvous point, the team regrouped, breathless but safe for the moment. The next phase of the plan was already in motion. They had to strike at the core of Gorath's power and cripple his command once and for all. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed more. "We've done enough to create chaos," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Now we gather the last of our allies and make our final move. Gorath is not invincible. His empire is fragile. We just need to push it over the edge." Kaelan nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'll head to the crew quarters. There are others there who might join us if we can convince them. We can't take the ship without their help." Ilara nodded in agreement. "And I'll head to the command center. If I can take down Gorath's communications, we can blind his forces and make it harder for him to regroup. It's time to end this." The final steps of their plan were set into motion. They knew the risks. But for the first time since her capture, Ilara felt a sense of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting to take back what was rightfully theirs. The rebellion was spreading. More and more crew members were beginning to realize that they were not bound to serve Gorath. They were beginning to see that the Warlord's empire could be torn down, and in its place, a new future could emerge. It was a future that Ilara would lead them to, no matter the cost. The war was far from over, but the turning point had arrived. And with it, a spark of hope that could change everything. Ilara could feel the pulse of the warship beneath her feet as she moved through the dimly lit corridors. The air was thick with tension, but there was no turning back now. The time had come for the final push. She had already sabotaged several key systems and created chaos within the ship. Now, it was time to go after the heart of Gorath's power, the command center. If they could take control of that, they could finally strike a blow that would shake his empire to its core. She moved quickly but quietly, every step calculated. Callan had already gone off to gather more allies, hoping to convince them to join their cause. The rest of her team was ready, waiting for her signal. Ilara had always known she was a leader, but now, more than ever, she felt the weight of her responsibility. This wasn't just about her people or her home. This was about ending the reign of a tyrant who had spread his cruelty across the stars. Ilara reached a junction in the ship's maze-like layout, where a wide corridor led to the command center. She paused, checking her surroundings. The path ahead was clear for now, but that could change in an instant. Her heart was racing, but she pushed the fear aside. She had led them this far, and she wasn't about to fail now. Taking a deep breath, she signaled to her team, and they moved forward in silence. The group was small but skilled. Each member had a task, and each knew their role. Together, they had the potential to bring down Gorath's empire. But they had to be swift. They couldn't afford to waste time. As they approached the command center, Ilara could feel her pulse quicken. This was it. They had to get inside, disable the systems, and take control before Gorath's soldiers could react. The doors to the command center were heavily guarded, but Ilara had already gathered information on the ship's security systems. Thanks to Kalen's knowledge of the ship's layout, they had a plan. Ilara and her team made their way to a nearby maintenance hatch, which led to a small passageway that would bring them to the back of the command center. This would allow them to bypass the main entrance and take the guards by surprise. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was their best shot. The team moved swiftly through the narrow passage, their footsteps muffled by the thick walls of the ship. Every turn, every corner could hide a danger, but Ilara kept her focus. She had been through so much already. She couldn't let fear take over now. Finally, they'd reached the back entrance of the command center. Ilara motioned for the team to stop, then carefully peered around the corner. The guards were stationed at the front of the room, their attention focused on the main doors. It was their opportunity. "We're going in," Ilara whispered. The team nodded, and Ilara led the way. They moved quickly but carefully, each step bringing them closer to their goal. As they reached the door, Ilara's pulse raced. She could hear the hum of the ship's engines and the low murmur of voices inside. She took a deep breath, then signaled for the team to move into position. They burst through the door, catching the guards by surprise. The soldiers barely had time to react before Ilara's team disabled them with quick, precise strikes. Ilara's heart was pounding in her chest as she surveyed the command center. The room was filled with large consoles and screens, all displaying data from across the ship. This was where Gorath made his decisions, where he controlled the entire fleet. Ilara quickly moved to the main control panel, her fingers flying over the buttons. It was complicated, but she had studied the ship's systems for days. She knew how to disable the security, block the communication channels, and take control of the ship's main systems. She could feel the weight of the moment as she worked. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a fight for the future. Kalen's voice echoed in her ear. "We've gathered more allies. They're waiting for your signal." Ilara didn't reply right away. She had to focus. The panel was almost ready. She could feel the tension building as her team kept watch, waiting for the inevitable reinforcements. They had no more time to waste. "Almost done," Ilara muttered to herself, her fingers trembling slightly as she entered the final sequence. The lights in the command center flickered as the ship's systems began to shut down. Ilara could feel the ship lurch beneath her feet. The plan was working. Suddenly, the door to the command center slammed open, and a group of Goreth's soldiers charged in, weapons drawn. Ilara spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for one of the weapons they had stolen earlier. The odds were against them, but Ilara wasn't about to let Goreth win. "We're not giving up," she shouted, her voice filled with determination. "This is our ship now." Her team fired, taking down the soldiers one by one. Ilara ducked behind a console, returning fire as her heart raced. The battle had begun. The sound of gunfire filled the room as Ilara's team fought to hold their ground. The soldiers were skilled, but Ilara and her allies were motivated. They weren't just fighting for their survival. They were fighting for a future free from Goreth's cruelty. In the midst of the chaos, Ilara saw one of her team members fall, but they didn't stop. They pushed forward, taking control of the command center piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and the soldiers were relentless, but Ilara knew this was the only way. There was no turning back. The battle raged on, but slowly the tide began to turn in their favor. The soldiers were starting to retreat as Ilara's team gained the upper hand. With each passing moment, the ship's control was slipping from Goreth's grip. The rebellion had come this far, and they were not about to lose now. Finally, with a last, decisive push, Ilara's team secured the command center. The remaining soldiers either surrendered or fled. Ilara stood, panting, her heart still racing from the fight. She looked around at her team, their faces filled with exhaustion but also relief. "We did it," Kalen said, his voice quiet but full of awe. Ilara nodded, a sense of triumph filling her chest. The war was far from over, but they had struck a critical blow. Goreth's empire was crumbling, and the people of the ship were beginning to see that they didn't have to live in fear anymore. Ilara took a deep breath and turned toward the communications console. She had one final message to send. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. The command center of Goreth's warship was silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems slowly coming back online. Ilara stood at the front of the room, her eyes fixed on the large holographic screen that displayed the state of the ship. The map of the warship was now under her control, the once pristine lines of Goreth's empire fading into chaos. She could hardly believe it. After all the trials and dangers, after the countless battles and moments of uncertainty, they had done it. The Warlord's stronghold had fallen, and the resistance now controlled the heart of the ship. The ship that once symbolized terror and oppression now belonged to those who fought for freedom. But Ilara knew their victory was not the end. It was only the beginning. She turned to her team, who stood behind her, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph on their faces. They had fought hard, and they had earned this moment. Each one of them had put their life on the line for this cause, and now they were one step closer to toppling Goreth's entire empire. "We've made it this far," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. "But we cannot rest. We still have work to do. The war is not over until Goreth is no longer in power. He will come after us, and we must be ready." Kalen stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. "Agreed, but we need more support. The crew knows we've taken control of the command center. Now is the time to rally them to our cause. We can't do this alone." Ilara nodded. "We'll need to send a message that Goreth's reign of terror is coming to an end. We need every ship, every soldier, and every citizen who was willing to stand up against him. The team got to work quickly, their movements efficient as they began preparing for the next phase of their mission. Ilara knew the key to victory lay not just in taking control of the ship, but in rallying the people who had suffered under Gorath's rule. The crew aboard the warship had endured years of oppression, and many had quietly hoped for a change. Now, Ilara would give them that change. As Ilara sat at the command console, her fingers dancing across the keys, she sent out a transmission to every corner of the ship. The message was simple but powerful. This is Ilara, leader of the resistance. Gorath's reign is over. The ship is ours now, and we stand united for freedom. No more will we live under his rule. Join us, and together we will build a future of peace and justice. She paused, staring at the screen. This was the moment. There was no turning back. If the message reached the right ears, the rebellion would spread like wildfire. But it was also a risk. Some would remain loyal to Gorath, no matter what. But Ilara had to take that risk. The stakes were too high. Just as the transmission ended, Kalon returned with a small group of soldiers. They were the first to join their cause, stepping forward with a mixture of hesitation and hope in their eyes. "We heard the message," one of the soldiers said, a man in his 30s with dark hair and a scar across his cheek. "We've seen what Gorath has done, and we're ready to fight for something better." Ilara met his gaze and nodded. "Thank you. You're not alone. There are many more who feel the same way. Together, we will end his reign." The soldiers gathered around, their faces serious but determined. As they spoke with Ilara and the rest of the team, word spread through the ship. The crew who had lived in fear under Gorath's regime were beginning to see a glimmer of hope. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about building a new world, one where they could live in peace, free from tyranny. As the days passed, the resistance continued to grow. More and more crew members, pilots, and engineers joined the cause. Some came quietly, while others joined with a loud cry of defiance. The mood on the ship shifted. Where there had once been fear, there was now a sense of unity and purpose. Ilara knew they couldn't wait forever. They had to act before Gorath could regroup. Reports came in from all over the ship, showing that Gorath's loyalists were trying to organize and retaliate. But the resistance was ready. The Warlord soldiers were spread thin, their morale shattered. The resistance's message had already taken root in the hearts of many. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon of the distant planet, Ilara gathered her team together. The time had come for their final strike. They had already taken control of the warship, but Gorath was still out there, and he would never give up without a fight. "We've made it this far," Ilara said, her voice steady, but filled with an urgency that the others could feel. "Today, we finish this. Today, we take down Gorath, and we end this war." The team nodded in agreement. Kalon looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with admiration. "You've brought us this far. We're with you, until the end." Ilara smiled, feeling the weight of her responsibility, but also a deep sense of gratitude. The war had been long, and the road ahead was uncertain, but she had come to realize something important. She wasn't fighting alone. She had the strength of her allies beside her, and together they could change the course of history. As the final plan was put into motion, Ilara stood tall, ready for the confrontation that was about to unfold. She could already hear the sounds of the approaching battle, the hum of the engines beneath her feet. The final chapter of this war was about to begin, and Ilara was ready to lead her people into a new era, one free from fear and oppression. The rebellion had come to life, and with it, the hope of a brighter future.